So good afternoon and welcome to the 75th course on geoinformatics for disaster management as part of the IIRS distance education course which you said. So today we will be talking about forest fire monitoring and risk assessment and how geoinformatics plays a key role in this. I am Arijit and I am looking after the Disaster Management Science Department at IIRS. So, when we talk about forest fire, I think most of us are aware of it. And it's a major recurrent phenomena which is resulting in loss of property resources and also causes adverse human health. If we see a conservative estimate, which was done by Economy and Environment Program of Southeast Asia, the cost of damage stemming from the Asian wildfires in 1 year is pegged at more than $4 billion US. And there has been an increase in the frequency and intensity of the forest fire or wildfires across the globe. So this requires the need for having forest fire danger indices as well as monitoring, both at global as well as regional level, which will help us for better risk and prediction. So when we talk about it, we should understand what exactly is the phenomena and how it is influenced, especially in the Southeast Asian region or South Asian region, specifically the Indian subcontinent. So when we talk about Indian forest fire, it is predominantly an anthropogenic origin. So almost, I would say 95% of the forest fires are caused by humans. They may be intentional or they may be accidental. But if we trace their origin, all of them have an anthropogenic origin. Some of the studies carried out by our group have actually proved the role of anthropogenic factors in the forest fires. For example, in the very initial stages, we started to plot the distance of fire locations from the perimeter of the forest fires. And we observed that most of the fires, almost more than 95% of the fire incidences or fire frequencies were located within 1 kilometer from the edge of the forest. Similarly, when we plotted the fire locations from the settlements, we found that the fire activity is the highest from around 1.5 to 3 kilometers from the settlement location. So this proves that the human activities in the vicinity of the forest are one of the prime causes for forest fires. For example, the fuel wood collectors, when they go inside the forest to collect the fuel wood, they do not go more than 1 kilometer from the edge of the forest, inside the forest. Similarly, when the grazers take their cattle to graze, they go to a distance of something like 2 to 3 kilometers from the village, where they allow the cattle to graze and they themselves sit there and maybe smoke cigarettes, which results in the forest fires. In fact, this COVID-19 lockdown last year provided a good opportunity for us to understand the role of human activities on forest fires, especially in the Western Himalayan states. We observed that due to the lockdown, the number of fire incidences actually were less by around more than 70%, because the activities or the fire incidences caused due to the tourism, the movement of vehicles and other anthropogenic activities had totally stopped. So only the subsistence activities were there, which of course resulted in some amount of fire. But the drastic high amount of fires which are generally observed were not observed during last year's lockdown, which goes on to prove that anthropogenic activity has a major role in forest fire across the Indian subcontinent. When we talk about the forest fire, what it needs, for a fire to occur, it needs three factors. One is the proper weather conditions, the topographic conditions, and availability of fuel. So what is the fuel in the forest fires? It's basically the plant material, which is fixed due to photosynthesis by the green plants, which are the cellulose. Now, when these cellulose burn, they produce carbon dioxide, water, and heat. So this fuel, the availability of the fuel, is a very, very important factor in any fire activities. So when we talk about the fire triangle, we have the weather parameters like wind, temperature, humidity, and precipitation, the topography like slope or aspect, and of course the fuel. There's the amount of fuel, arrangement of fuel, and the moisture present in the fuel. Now, when we talk about wildfire, especially when we are talking about wildfire in context of geospatial domain, if we plot a fire activity on space and time, we have the flame, which is the basic unit of fire, which covers an area of few meters and is there for a few seconds, which require oxygen, heat, and fuel. But when the amount of fuel is higher and the weather conditions are conducive for fire with appropriate topography, we have the forest fires, which continue for days together. Now, when a vegetation type is so adapted that the climatic regime provides the appropriate weather conditions for forest fires every year, and the vegetation is such that it is able to produce the fuel which is required for the fire to occur every year, and we have availability of the sources of ignition, then you have the fire regimes. A classical example of fire regime is that of African savanna, where you have forest fire almost every year. But we are observing that fire is, there is, I would say, a higher frequency of forest fire in the last few decades. Is climate change playing a role in it? The answer may be yes. Because what we see is that the temperatures are rising across the world, especially in the northern hemispheres. There's the Arctic region and the subarctic regions. There the snow is melting sooner. The forests are drier for a longer period of time, which are providing the conditions apt for wildfires to ignite and spread. It has been estimated by a group of researchers that the cumulative impact of climate on the wildfires, especially over Siberia, Northern Europe, US, and Canada, is almost 50% higher than almost 50% of the total area which has been burned. Means if there were no climate change or no influences of the climate-driven changes in the weather patterns, then maybe 50% of the forest would not have burned. And why are this happening? It is because the global temperature is increasing. Over last 1 century, there has been a significant increase in the average global temperature across the world. And it's not just the average temperature. Apart from this, there are many other factors which are changing, such as the changes in the soil moisture. In fact, due to this climate change, there is a drought-like situation across the world, mostly in the areas which were predominantly wet areas. Apart from that, there has been an increase in the number of dry days. Although the precipitation intensity have increased, but the amount of rainfall or the precipitation is much higher in a very short number of days, whereas there are much more days which are dry. So number of dry days have increased. And this has produced a drought-like situation at almost all over the globe. And all these factors have been incorporated to model what is going to happen if there is a 1.8 degrees centigrade warming across the world. Simulations have shown that many areas, especially in the tropics, like India, Latin America, parts of Africa, will have more than 1,000 times the number of forest fires with a background from a background mean of 1850. Means the Indian subcontinent is one of the areas which are going to face a huge impact of forest fires in the coming decades due to the global warming. And this year, we have all seen the impact of fire across the Indian subcontinent with very high incidences of forest fires in the Eastern Ghats like Simlipal. Then we have parts of the Visakhapatnam and Vijayawada districts, which had seen forest fires, and also some of the areas in the southern parts of the Eastern Ghats. In fact, now the Western Himalayas have a huge amount of forest fires which are going on. So the situation is very alarming. And we can all see that temperature has a very, very direct impact on the fire occurrences in India. This is the mean monthly temperature of 2016 or the fire season. The fire season in India is between January to June. So in January, the southern part of the subcontinent starts warming up. So we have the fire incidences in parts of Western Ghats, especially in Kerala and southern Karnataka. By February, the southern part of the subcontinent warm up considerably, and we have incidences of fires. By March, almost the entire subcontinent warms up a lot. And since the winter rains are very scarce in this area, so the region is quite dry, and there is a huge amount of litter which has been deposited, which leads to the accumulation of fuel. So there are a number of incidences of forest fires across the country. By April, most of the fuels have dissipated, and so we have only few pockets of fires, especially in the Chota Nagpur region and Vindhyans. By May, there is an onset of monsoon in the southern part, so most of the fire in the southern part of the Indian subcontinent has disappeared. Only we have fire in the hills. By June, since there is a monsoon across the country, so there is no fire. So this is the pattern we have almost every year. And if we see a snapshot of the forest fire activities across the globe, especially during the fire season, there is a March, 10 days during March. This I have taken something like 17 to 21st of March 2017. So this is how the global distribution of wildfires look like in the northern hemisphere, of course. And this converts into the southern hemisphere when there's a fire season in the southern hemisphere, that is during September and October. Before I go further, I just like to briefly discuss about the Sendai framework. So in 2015, we had the Sendai framework at Sendai in Japan, where all the countries who are a party to the Hyogo framework came together to chart out the priorities of action for the next 15 years. That is up to 2030. And the Sendai framework had 7 targets, basically to reduce the damages, reduce the loss of life, and improve the resilience of the communities to the disaster by basically 4 priorities of action. Like, that is understanding the disaster risk, which is basically investing in understanding the science behind the disasters, then investing in the disaster risk reduction for resilience, both infrastructure, that is investing in infrastructure, both space and ground-based, then enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction, which translates into early warning and logistics, and strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster. Now, when we talk about governance, the prime factor for governance is the information. So it basically translates into dissemination of, or effective dissemination of the information. So what exactly has been recommended by the Sendai framework can be summarized at enhanced early warning system, an effective dissemination of information. And to do this, what we need is a sensor web for real-time information retrieval, processing, and dissemination. So what we are doing is that we are trying to shift from estimating the disaster loss to estimating the disaster risk. So with this will help us in effective disaster risk management in the future. So when we talk about forest fires, there are basically 4 types of forest fires. There may be creeping fires, ground fires, surface fires, or ground fires. So what are the creeping fires? Creeping fires are mostly observed in the cold latitudes, where we have a thick amount of duff, which is nothing but the dead leaves which do not decompose because of the cold weather. And you have a very thick, almost 20 to 30 centimeters of dead and decaying organic matter in the forest floor. So when the fire occurs beneath it, we are not able to see the forest fires. They just creep along the ground, and in some of the areas, flame just comes out from the ground. Then we have the ground fire, which is the most common fire in India. It's basically the dead and decaying, as well as the dry leaves, branches, twigs, and the herbs and shrubs which are there, they burn. The trees are mostly unaffected. Then we have the surface fires, which are predominantly in the savanna regions, especially in Africa, which is one of the most devastating of the forest fires, because most of the wild flora and which are there in the savanna are killed or affected. And finally, we have the crown fires. These are predominantly in the areas which are dominated by coniferous vegetation, such as California, where the entire crown burns, and these are one of the most devastated, and most of the human casualties due to forest fires are due to this type of forest fires. So with this background, I'll just come to the how we use space technology for forest fire. When we talk about the various parameters which are measured, like burnt area mapping, burnt area progression, identification of active fire locations, fire proneness assessment, all of these, they require a good amount of space-based inputs. The parameters like burnt area mapping, burnt area progression, or identification of active forest fires, almost 90% of the inputs are from the remote sensing data. Whereas when we talk about fire proneness or fire spread models or damage assessment, we need the information from other sources also, like ground as well as the ground-based sensors. So when we talk about the remote sensing sensors for monitoring forest fires, we have a host of sensors now. But the most commonly used are MODIS, SNPP VIRIS, Landsat, LIS3, etc. In fact, we also have NOVA. So for active fire identification, what we use are MODIS and SNPP VIRIS. These two sensors are able to map. In fact, there are two MODIS sensors which are there in the sky presently. One is aboard Terra and one is aboard Aqua. And we also have two SNPP VIRIS sensors, about 2 satellites. So a combination of all these satellites provide us the information of the active fires across the world 4 times a day. Of course, SNPP VIRIS has a higher resolution, so it is able to map a higher number of forest fires across the globe. When we talk about the burnt area, we have been using various sensors like IIRS AWIPS, Landsat TM, LIS3, and Sentinel-2, whichever has a pass over that region, to assess the burnt area of that region. And the availability of the sphere band, in fact, I'll come to that in the later slide, has a very key role in identification of the burnt area in the sensor. So when we talk about forest fire monitoring, first is the active fire monitoring. And we have 2 sensors, as I talked about earlier. There's a MODIS and SNPP VIRIS. So MODIS has been there right from 2001 itself. We are getting this data. And using the contextual algorithm developed by Luis Giglio, we have been able to identify the active fires based on what I call contextual. That is, I'll show you how it is done. So what is done is that it tries to identify the higher temperature of a particular pixel compared to the surrounding pixels. So once it is able to, the algorithm is able to identify the pixels having a higher temperature signature from the surrounding pixels, it marks them as a potential fire pixel. And then the other parameters are applied, like it should be within a forested area, and it should not be having a very high continuous high temperature signature across the year. And all those factors are then used to identify the forest fires. Same algorithm is used by using the SNPP VIRIS sensors also, because they have a more or less similar sensor parameters. Although the spatial resolution of MODIS is 1 kilometer, whereas the spatial resolution of SNPP VIRIS has two resolutions, that is 375 and 750 meters. And presently, National Remote Sensing Center is operationally producing the active fire information, and which is then transferred to Forest Survey of India, which provides the value additions in form of overlaying it over the boundaries, forest boundaries over it, and then sending it to the concerned officials. So for identification of active fires, it depends on the extent of burning, how much area is burning, because if it's a 1 kilometer pixel, there should be a significant amount of area which is burning to pick up the thermal signature. Then the amount of flame or smoke ratio, background characteristics, atmospheric interference, and sensor saturation. And this entire thing is region specific, because the algorithm which has been developed for, say, US need not work in India or need not work in Africa. Then you have the value additions, then the real-time dissemination utilization, and the feedback mechanisms. So how it is done? So the MODIS has the thermal channels, two thermal channels. That is, one is a 4 micrometer and another is a 11 micrometer. So these two thermal channels are used to extract the thermal signature, which is an anomalous from the surrounding pixels. So basically what it does, it picks out the thermal anomaly. And then it is conveyed to the as a point to the users. So when we are using MODIS or SNPP VIRIS, they basically observe the Earth's surface twice every 24 hours, once in daylight and once in night. So MODIS and SNPP VIRIS both together provide us basically how many? 4 observations over the Earth's surface every day. We also have some geostationary operation environmental satellites like GEOS, Himawari, or ISRO 3D 3DR, which also has the potential to provide information on the forest fire, active forest fires. For example, in the fire incidents in Uttarakhand in 2018, we have used MODIS and SNPP VIRIS in tandem to estimate the daily fire incidences across Uttarakhand. If we talk about the geostationary forest fires, geostationary sensors for picking up the forest fires, we have INSAT 3D 3DR, which is an Indian satellite over India. So this INSAT 3D 3DR has 2 thermal channels, one at 11 micron and one at MIR, that is at 4 micron. So a combination of these two are used to detect the fire activities, and since it is a geostationary, so we are able to image the disk over India every half an hour. So effectively we are able to map the area every half an hour, and this is able to provide us information how long the fire has been at a particular place. Although this particular sensor, since it is at a height of 36,000 kilometers above Earth, has a coarser resolution of around 4 kilometers. But still, the big fires which are there for a long time can be identified, and appropriate management of that can be taken up. Second aspect of monitoring is the burnt area mapping. So when we talk about burnt area mapping, one of the key aspects is the shortwave infrared band. And when we use this band, since it has a higher wavelength, so it is able to pass through the smoke, and we are able to get a better picture of the ground through the smoke. Furthermore, the sphere band also helps a better spectral separability of the fire scars. So as you see in the next slide, here we have an area near Almora. And you can see the same area which was there in 2018 and the same area which was previous to the burning in 2016 October. So you can see the difference, how the fire scar has been could be very well separated using the shortwave infrared band. And using this, we can prepare a map as well as the area statistics to identify the amount of burnt area in the region. So you can, in the next few slides, I'll show you the present capability based on the Sentinel data of identification of the active fires as well as the burnt fires. So you can see the area, same area. It's a normal false color composite. Now this is a different false color composite with shortwave infrared bands. And here you can see the areas which are actively burning and the area which are the scars, burnt scars. A zoomed area, you can see the area which are actively burning and the burnt scars. So this is now the capability which we have, and we are also improving upon it day by day. And since we are able to prepare a map, so we are able to identify the district level burn map across the country, which is done by a National Remote Sensing Center. And apart from that, the impact of forest fires on the ecosystem can also be identified. So if we, since we have already prepared the biological richness map, the vegetation type map, and other things, so we are able to identify in the Rajaji Tiger Reserve and some of the national parks, the impact of forest fires on the biodiversity of the region, especially with respect to the seedlings, saplings, herbs, shrubs, smaller animals, insects, and the various habitats of the flora. Apart from the ecological impacts, the impact of forest fires on the air quality is also tremendous. Because of forest fire, the smoke which is released results in high aerosol concentration in the atmosphere. And this high aerosol concentration is one of the key contributors to the high particulate matter over Uttarakhand during the fire seasons. And this results in health hazards as well as many other health complications to the residents in this region. Apart from that, based on satellite retrieval, we could also identify the accumulation of carbon monoxide due to forest fire in this region. And we can also see the concentration of nitrogen dioxide over Uttarakhand has seen to increase, mainly because of the forest fires. And we can see that due to the forest fires, how much of the carbon dioxide is emitted every year, and which of the regions are mostly responsible for this. This has been simulated in the map here. This work has been done by Max Planck Institute for Meteorology in Germany. But we are also interested in identifying the areas which are at risk. So one of the very simple methods to identify the areas which are vulnerable to forest fire is identifying the frequency of forest fires in a particular region. So using a 2.5 kilometer grid, we took the daily fire data for last 20 years and tried to see the frequency. And you can see the areas, mostly the sal-dominated areas and the pine-dominated areas in Uttarakhand showed a very high sensitivity to fire based on the frequency. But this is a very coarse level analysis. what we need is an early warning system. So we started developing a fire danger rating system using various biophysical components. So when we analyzed it, we found that there were we could identify them into two biophysical components. One is a dynamic index, which is based on the weather parameters like air temperature, relative humidity, wind speed, and rainfall. And other was a static index based on the constant parameters like fuel characteristics, topographic conditions, vegetation type, erratic conditions, etc. And these two were then integrated, or the two models were developed separately as a static fire danger index and a dynamic fire danger index. Both were integrated with a generalized additive model to give a forest fire final danger index. And this had an accuracy ranging between 86% to 92% with respect to actual fire occurrence in the ground. So we are actually now producing a daily fire index map, fire danger map. And we basically are estimating it with the number of fire incidences which actually fall in the very high region. This entire thing has now been automated and is run daily, almost 30 minutes after mode is passed. The beta version is now, in fact, now we are providing a scientific version to the forest departments as automated forest fire risk advisory, which is known as Forest Fire Risk Advisory and Monitoring System, France. And this is providing the areas which are at very high risks on a daily basis. And it's not just that, this entire system is also able to, we have customized in such a way that we are now providing the SMS alert to the forest officials of Uttarakhand with each unique URL, which also helps us, or the recipient can provide us a field validation of the alerts. So we also have a mobile-based app for forest fire reporting and monitoring, which has been developed for Jammu and Kashmir Forest Department, as well as Uttarakhand Forest Department, and Mexican Forest Department has shown interest in adapting it. This app actually helps in, it's an Android-based app, which helps in reporting the fire incidences from the field. And since this web dashboard is located in the head office, or the areas which is or the control office, so they are able to monitor and move the resources to combat the forest fires. I'll just show you a small video of how the forest fires using space technology, the monitoring of forest fire can be done as a fly-through. So you can see this is a Sentinel data, which has been appropriately enhanced to identify the areas which are under forest fires and the areas which have been burnt due to forest fires. Apart from that, there is another areas where people are working in, where how the fire is, once the fire has occurred, how it is spreading. So this basically requires 2 or 3 aspects. One is we need to predict the weather conditions. Second is that we need to identify the landscape connectivity. And third is we need to model the forest fire behavior. So using graph theory, the connectivity among the forest patches have been prepared. Once this connectivity is prepared, Then using WRF, the wind conditions, temperature conditions, humidity profiles are predicted for the next 72 hours. And using a cellular automata-based model, which we have developed in-house, the forest fire spread is modeled. I'll just show you a small area where we have worked on it in Corbett National Park and then validated it in the ground. So this is an area I'm showing you a zoomed in version. You will just see the areas where the fire is now spreading. So every iteration is a time step of 1 hour. So every 1 hour, what is the spread of the forest fire, the rate and the direction. So we have simulated it for around 48 hours. And based on this, I collected the information from the ground as well as the actual burnt map we have prepared using high resolution satellite data, and then matched it. So you see, the red one is the area which has actually burned in the ground, and the black one was the area which has been simulated by the model. So you can see a very good match between the actual burnt area and the simulated burnt area. And all these were validated through actual field visits and extensive ground verifications. So presently we are at the stage where we are comfortable with forest fire danger index, spread models, but we also need to develop, we integrate humans, backpropagation algorithm to make an integrated model. And then we also need to have a sensor web where we have real-time data reception and as well as model output dissemination, which will give us our final goal, that is a decision support system. For this, we need information from space, we need information from ground, and we need a group of people, both from scientific community, academia, and the line departments, to work in tandem to provide a good working model for a good decision support system, which will help us to preserve our environment as well as our forest resources from the vagaries of forest fire. Thank you very much
for starting there. Okay.